Welcome back to our channel, where we break down the latest in international trade, economics, and policy moves that shape our world. Today, we're diving into a hot topic: the recent move by the U.S. exempting several high-tech products like smartphones and laptops from the steep tariffs imposed on Chinese imports. Many have been asking, is this the first concession in the tariff war with China, or is it simply a gesture of goodwill? In this video, we're going to explore all the angles and examine what this measure really means for U.S. China trade relations. To understand today's move, we need to step back and review the tariff war between the United States and China. In recent years, particularly since 2018, the U.S. administration imposed a series of increasingly punitive tariffs on Chinese imports. At one point, China faced tariffs as high as 145%, designed as part of a broader strategy to pressure Beijing over issues such as intellectual property rights, technology transfer, and trade imbalances. In retaliation, China also imposed tariffs, some reaching up to 125% on American goods. This tit-for-tat escalation was designed to disrupt supply chains and force changes in trade practices. However, one of the unintended consequences was a significant increase in prices for many consumer products, especially in the tech sector, where products like smartphones, computers, and semiconductor devices are essential not just for businesses but for everyday consumers. Late last week, the U.S. Customs and Border Protection Agency announced a notice exempting about 20 categories of high-tech products from these punitive tariffs. What does this mean? Essentially, products such as smartphones, laptops, memory chips, and flat-panel displays, items that many tech giants like Apple, Dell, and Nvidia depend on, will not face the full brunt of a 145% tariff rate anymore. To be precise, although these products are now exempt from the steep reciprocal tariff specifically targeted at Chinese imports, they aren't entirely duty-free. They remain subject to a baseline tariff rate, in many cases around 10%. The logic behind this reclassification is to relieve the immediate pressure on prices for tech consumers and companies while still maintaining a trade imbalance. In other words, it's a tactical recalibration rather than a wholesale policy reversal. Now to the crucial question: does this move signal that the U.S. is making its first concessions in the tariff war with China? Or is it simply a temporary, tactical relief measure? Let's break down the arguments on each side. Some analysts argue that exempting key tech products could be seen as a goodwill gesture. From this perspective, the administration might be attempting to build a more cooperative trade climate by easing the tariff burden on critical electronics, which are central to both the U.S. economy and everyday consumer life. The U.S. government might be opening a door to further negotiations and signaling that it's willing to find common ground with China. Supporters of this view might note, the move helps lower costs for consumers and tech companies, potentially stabilizing an otherwise turbulent market. In the context of a prolonged trade war, offering relief, even if limited, might be viewed as the first step toward a negotiated settlement. By easing some of the pressure, the administration might hope to mitigate the economic fallout and restore investor confidence. Industry analysts describe the move as a major reprieve for tech companies, providing temporary relief as more targeted measures are planned. On the flip side, many experts believe this move is not so much a concession as it is a tactical readjustment. Here's why. While the steep tariffs on Chinese imports have been partially rolled back for tech products, the U.S. has not abandoned its broader tariff strategy. In fact, these products are being shifted into a new tariff bucket. They will soon face separate, sector-specific tariffs, especially under initiatives like the semiconductor investigation, which suggests that the U.S. still intends to exert pressure on Chinese trade practices. The exemption appears to address immediate domestic concerns, such as high prices and disrupted supply chains, without altering the overall confrontational posture of the administration. It is a measure aimed at preventing economic pain rather than signaling a willingness to compromise on deeper trade issues. Historical patterns in trade wars reveal that temporary relief measures are common as governments try to balance domestic economic needs with long-term strategic goals. Similar adjustments have been seen during previous rounds of trade disputes, where easing certain tariffs did not equate to making permanent concessions. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick clarified that these devices are exempt from the reciprocal tariffs but will soon face sector-specific tariffs under the semiconductor investigation. Let's hear what some experts are saying. Analysts like Wedbush Securities' Dan Ives have described the exemption as the best news possible for tech companies in the immediate term. Ives explained that the lifting of the punitive tariffs provided some much-needed relief to a sector that had been reeling from massive price shocks and supply chain disruptions. Moreover, market reactions have been mixed. While tech stocks initially bounced back as investors welcomed the relief, there remains a high degree of uncertainty. The fact that these products will eventually be subject to new, Albeit different, tariffs means that long-term confidence may still be shaken. Companies are now facing the challenge of planning their supply chains and pricing strategies in an environment where policy shifts continue to occur with little warning. So, what does this mean for the ongoing trade war with China? Despite the temporary relief, the strategic framework of the U.S. tariff policy remains largely unchanged. The exemption is not a wholesale pivot away from high tariffs, it's a recalibration aimed at preventing domestic economic harm while keeping pressure on Chinese trade practices. Broadening our view, this move should be seen as part of a complex balancing act. On one hand, the U.S. government is tasked with protecting its domestic industries and consumers from the negative effects of overly aggressive tariffs. On the other hand, it seeks to maintain the leverage that high tariffs have provided in its negotiations with China. The immediate priority is to stabilize the domestic tech sector, which is highly sensitive to price fluctuations. However, the underlying trade dispute focused on issues such as intellectual property and technology transfers remains unresolved. Future negotiations. While some might interpret the exemption as a goodwill gesture, it is more likely a temporary adjustment used as a bargaining chip in ongoing negotiations. Both sides continue to jockey for position, with the U.S. signaling that certain concessions can be made temporarily to avoid immediate economic damage, while still reserving the right to reimpose tariffs in targeted ways later on. Global market impact. Other countries watching the U.S. China trade war are taking note of these changes, as shifts in tariff policy often signal broader trends. If additional concessions are made, it might encourage similar adjustments from other governments engaged in trade disputes with major economies. Looking ahead, experts suggest that while this exemption alleviates some immediate concerns, the U.S. is likely to introduce new tariffs especially focused on critical sectors like semiconductor manufacturing in the coming months. This means that while tech companies might enjoy a short-term reprieve, they must prepare for a more challenging environment as targeted tariffs come into play. For tech companies, they may benefit from lower import costs right now, but the long-term strategy will likely force them to reevaluate their supply chains and potentially shift more production to domestic facilities, albeit at a higher cost. For consumers, you might see stable prices on electronics for the moment, but any future moves or additional tariffs could reverse these benefits, leading to higher prices down the road. For global trade, this dynamic where temporary relief is followed by targeted impositions underscores the ongoing uncertainty in global markets. Stakeholders will need to remain agile as policies continue to shift. The overall picture is that this move isn't so much the first concession in a spirit of goodwill, but rather a tactical adjustment designed to buy time, ease domestic pressure, and set the stage for more focused tariff measures. To wrap up, let's answer the burning question. Does this move mean that the United States is making its first concession in the tariff war with China? Or is it simply a gesture of goodwill? Based on the evidence and expert opinions, the answer leans toward the latter. It is not a genuine concession in the diplomatic sense but a carefully calibrated, tactical measure. This exemption helps alleviate immediate economic pain in a sensitive sector but does not represent a shift away from the broader strategic objectives that have defined the U.S. tariff policy. For years, the U.S. still intends to maintain or even reintroduce tariff pressures in targeted ways, ensuring that while the domestic market is spared from the most harmful impacts, the negotiation leverage against China remains intact. As always, the situation continues to evolve. Stakeholders from tech giants to everyday consumers should keep an eye on further policy announcements, as these adjustments can have ripple effects throughout the global supply chain and international trade negotiations. Thank you for watching. If you found this breakdown helpful, please give us a thumbs up. Comment below with your thoughts on whether you view this measure as a strategic pivot or merely temporary relief. And don't forget to subscribe for more in-depth analyses of global trade policies and their economic impacts. Stay tuned for our next video, where we explore how these policy shifts might influence other sectors of the economy and what they mean for the future of U.S.-China relations. Until next time, thanks for watching.